All right. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is daily vlog number 165. Math is hard. So, today, I want to talk about the most exciting thing that has ever happened in the history of ever, and that is the Visions of Mana date announcement trailer thingy jig. I am super excited about Visions of Mana. Got my orange juice again because still feeling terrible. So, anyone unaware, way back in the before times, in the 90s, there was a game that in the US was called Final Fantasy Adventure. It was a Game Boy game. But in Japan, it was called Seiken Densetsu, which roughly translates to Legend of the Holy Sword. So when they brought it over to the U.S., they didn't think U.S. audiences, because at that point they still thought that U.S. audiences were too dumb to play RPGs, and they didn't think U.S. audiences would embrace a brand new series from Square Enix. Over there, it wasn't Square Enix, it was just Square at that point. Or Square Soft. I can't remember which one they were at that point. But anyway, Square was known for the Final Fantasy series. And so they decided to rebrand it as Final Fantasy Adventure, but it was a completely new series that actually started off what is now known as the Mana series. And it's named that way because the second game in the series, which again in Japan, Seiken Densetsu 2, but in America, it was called Secret of Mana. And it is one of my favorite Super Nintendo games ever. It is not the most amazing game ever. There are some glaring problems, but I played it like crazy when I was a kid. I own multiple copies of it as an adult. I no longer have an original Super Nintendo version of it, but I did for the longest time. But I've got it on. I've got a copy on my Switch as part of the Mana collection or whatever it's called, that had Final Fantasy Adventure, Secret of Mana, and then Trials of Mana with its first North American release. I own the remake, the really bad remake on Steam. And the remake is part of the PlayStation Plus collection, so I have a save file on my PS5 of me replaying through the remake. Which, if you turn off the remake soundtrack, it's not a bad game. It's not a good game, but it's not a bad game. And then that was followed by Seiken Densetsu 3, which didn't get a release in the US until a few years ago as part of the Collection of Mana on the Switch. And that was officially renamed Trials of Mana. Then the PlayStation had Legend of Mana, which was a nonsense, crazy game that was super confusing, but if you got into it, was really awesome. And then they started kind of diluting it with a bunch of weird titles. You had, I think it's called Friends of Mana, which was a DS game. Encouraged multiplayer, but it wasn't all that. It was a dungeon crawler. There was Heroes of Mana, which was a sequel to Seiken Densetsu 2, which didn't make sense because no one in the US had ever played Seiken Densetsu 2. Or rather, I think it was actually a prequel to it, but whatever. You had Dawn of Mana, which was a PS2 game that just sucked really bad. And that kind of killed the Mana series for over a decade, because it was not well received. It didn't sell very well. They played around with some, they've got some ports. I've got the Secret of Mana port on my phone. Forgot that's one of the copies I own. So they did some ports on mobile devices. They actually released two different mobile only Secret of Manas. One was a more action RPG kind of a version of it that got canceled pretty quickly. It only lasted a couple years. The other one, I can't remember what it was called, but I played it on my phone, and it was action oriented, but it was a gacha game, and so you had to unlock different characters from Mana games, and it was interesting, but it lasted like 7 months or something like that. So that didn't do very well at all. And then suddenly we get this announcement of Visions of Mana, and it's supposed to be coming out this summer, and we just got the trailer for it, and oh my god, does it look so cool and so awesome. The thing that I love about the Mana series is, first of all, despite the fact that the Mana games do deal with some pretty heavy topics, they do it from a very kind of wholesome and lighthearted approach. Like, the original Sword of Mana, you start off as a slave. And then the entire plot of it is basically you trying to kind of get revenge against the leader of the country that enslaved you. And despite the fact that it's a relatively plot light game, because it was on the Game Boy, and so there just wasn't a lot of space for a lot of plot, it still deals with some pretty heavy stuff. And then you get to Secret of Mana, and you know, the story itself is kind of silly at points, but the overarching plot is kind of the idea of man trying to usurp nature in this kind of battle between the artificial and the natural world, and who gets to win. And the end of the game, without getting too spoilery, is extremely bittersweet, because you are able to stop the end of the world, which was caused almost entirely by mankind creating this giant thing called the Mana Fortress, and making the planet think that they needed to wipe out humanity in order to protect the planet. And so you're able to stop this world-ending event, but because of that, it permanently changes the world. And again, slight spoiler alert, it removes, for a game that's, 25, 30 years old, it removes all mana from the world. And all the creatures and beings that are part mana, that are kind of connected to mana, all just cease to exist. And so it's really, really interesting to me how they can tell very mature stories in a very light-hearted and wholesome way. And I was a sucker for action RPGs. Still am. I love action RPGs just in general. So one of the reasons I was so excited about the Dragon Age gameplay reveal, because I really, really love action RPGs. I think they're super, super fun. And most definitely Dragon Age, the Veilguard, or the Veilguards, is going to be an action RPG. So yeah, everything about it is really interesting. One of the I guess defining aspects of the series is each game, for the most part, is its own continuity. It's not like The Legend of Zelda, where Nintendo has done everything they can to try and make a timeline that shows when each different Legend of Zelda happens, but they're all basically happening in the same world. The Mana series, all the creators and everything go, no, they're kind of like Final Fantasy, where the Final Fantasy games are not connected in any way, shape, or form, with the rare exception of Final Fantasy X technically being a super, 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 super early prequel to Final Fantasy VII. And if you were not aware of that, check out some of the weird stuff about those two games. But the basic premise of a Mana game is there are these 8 elemental spirits, generally connected to some kind of elemental stone or seed, and they provide, basically the power of nature is regulated by these seeds or stones and these elemental spirits. And invariably what tends to happen in every single Mana game is someone realizes that there's a lot of power to be had in these stones or these seeds, and decides to try and utilize them in some way, shape, or form. In Secret of Mana, it was they use the seeds to help power the mana fortress. In Trials of Mana, they used the seals on the stones to kind of break their way into the Mana Sanctuary and get the Sword of Mana. It's a common theme throughout there. And so you very regularly have this theme going on in there of the juxtaposition, that word that I can't think of right now. My brain is going to annoy me until I look up this word. Juxtaposition. There we go. The juxtaposition of the need to innovate and the need of technology to advance, with the idea that nature and the natural world is important and needs to be protected as well. And so that's always really interesting. I love the elemental spirits aspect. Oh, and the other thing that is in every single mana game is this thing called the Sword of Mana, which again, depending on the game, looks different, but the basic idea of the Sword of Mana is the Sword of Mana is the instrument that the goddess of mana used to create the world. It's a super powerful thing. A lot of times it's pitched as being able to grant wishes, or change reality in some way, shape, or form. And so, because of that, you get some really interesting, unique stories that can be told. Oh, and then there's also the other thing that always happens is there's this thing called the Tree of Mana, which is the source of all mana. And so, yeah, so the newest iteration of Mana series is called Visions of Mana. And there's a lot of things in there that just get me really, really happy. First of all, it's an action RPG, which I'm a huge, huge fan of. Second of all, you get multiple party members. You actually get a total of 5 party members, but you can only have 3 active at any given time. So, and that is a kind of staple of a lot of the Mana series games is you'll have a 3-person party. The first one, you had your person and then one other. And then Secret of Mana and Trials of Mana both had 3-person teams. And then the later ones, you would generally only have one player. But like Legend of Mana, you only had one player character, but you could build a golem, a little robot, and you could recruit animals. So you could have, and you could also have allies. And so a combination of, you always had to have the player character, but then either ally, monster, or golem, you could have a party of up to 3 people when you were playing Legend of Mana, which again gets a lot of flack that it doesn't deserve. It used a really strange non-linear storytelling method that was really confusing if you didn't pay really close attention. But if you did pay really close attention, there was some awesome stuff in there. So yeah, you get to have a 3-person party made up of 3 of the 5 various playable characters. So that's interesting to me. They're all going to have the ability to interact with mana spirits in some way, shape, or form. The only way they've really shown us is a couple of the characters can use mana spirits as a way to traverse the open world that you're in. So like you can use the water mana spirit to kind of float in a water bubble. Or they show the main character using the fire mana spirit to literally like throw fireballs in the middle of combat and stuff like that. So that in and of itself I find really interesting and fun. But the thing that really hooked me has been something that they've only been showing recently. You can change classes based on which elemental spirit you effectively have equipped to the character. And that, I am a sucker for a class system. It's one of my favorite parts of Trials of Mana is the fact that each character can do, in the base game, each character can do 2 class changes that changes how the character plays. And the Trials of Mana remake, which is a brilliant, fantastic game, your choice of class vastly changes how the character plays. Whereas in the original one, It would change like your special attack, and that was really, and sometimes it changed some of the spells that you get access to. But for the most part, most of the original version of Trials of Mana, you're just walking around attacking people, and then every so often casting a spell, depending on the characters that you chose. In the Trials of Mana remake, like for the character of Hawkeye, Hawkeye, uh, if you choose one path, he becomes very focused and very kind of built around the idea that using your strong attack will impose status effects to the enemy, and then you eventually get this ability that any enemy that has a status effect affecting them has a chance of just instantly dying when you hit them. And the thing with Hawk is he attacks a lot. He uses a pair of daggers for his weapons, and so every attack that you make is at minimum 2 attacks. And when you start doing some of the combos that he can do, he's doing like 6 or 7 attacks with a single button press. So he becomes this kind of powerhouse that's just constantly going around poisoning and then insta-killing enemies everywhere. If you go the other path that changes him from like a ninja into a ranger, he becomes very spell-focused. But the spells that he has are not what you would normally consider spells, like the magic-using character Angela has. The spells that he has are all traps. However, mechanically, he's a spellcaster. And if you build him around spellcasting, he can actually do as much damage as Angela, the sorceress. And so it's a really, really cool system. So now that Visions of Mana has revealed that all the characters are going to be able to not only like go through class changes, but they're going to be able to go through class changes basically at will, because they just equip a different spirit of mana, and it changes how they act, it changes their weapons, it changes everything. I am just so pumped about this game. And again, because this channel is mostly dedicated to tabletop RPGs, I will admit one of the first things I thought about when I saw the trailer was, ooh, how could I turn this into a tabletop RPG campaign? I think I mentioned before, I'm starting to consider possibly, if anyone doesn't know, the month of December, I run D&D games on Wednesday nights. I have 2 different campaigns. I alternate them. So first and third of the month, I do Traversing the Veil, which is my kind of Cowboy Bebop, Eberron kind of inspired campaign where everyone's on airships and they're kind of outside the law characters. Whereas on the second and fourth, I have The Legend of the Three Kingdoms, which started off as kind of a more Magnificent Seven style game where a bunch of strangers get together to stop the bad guys, and eventually translated to my own personal Ravenloft style campaign where they're in a domain of dread, they're fighting against a Dark Lord, and that one's been doing really, really well as well. However, in the month of December, I stopped running both of those campaigns, and every Wednesday in the month of December, I run something new. The first time I did it, I ran a new RPG every week. That was a mistake. It was cool, and I got to do a lot of different things, but oh wow, did that mess up my brain for a long time. The year after, instead of doing a new RPG every week, what I decided to do is I would just run a single 4 session campaign, because there's generally 4 Wednesdays in the month of December, and it'll let me explore something new, do something different. It gives me kind of a creative refresh. The first year I did a mini campaign, it was Power Rangers. Last year, or this past December, I did a Fabula Ultima campaign, which went really, really well, and we had a ton of fun playing. So this year, and I generally like to start planning around summertime for what I'm going to do in December, because it takes a lot of work for me to, thank you phone, for me to be able to do something like that. So I'm starting to toss out ideas, because Dragon Age, the Veil Guards is going to be launching, I think, either late October or early November. Fall. I was thinking about possibly doing a Dragon Age campaign, using either the Dragon Age RPG, which is a tabletop RPG specifically created for Dragon Age, and surprisingly enough, was the very first tabletop RPG I ever ran. Or, now that Visions of Mana is coming out in August, I'm tossing around the idea of maybe doing a Mana series themed campaign for my Daily December campaign. I'm not sold on either of them yet. And the thing with Dragon Age again, the Dragon Age RPG exists. However, they eventually released a setting neutral version of the RPG system that is used to do the Dragon Age RPG, and the system itself is called Fantasy Age. There's a modern version of it called Modern Age, where you can tell, stories, science fiction and kind of modern based stories. But Fantasy Age recently had a second edition, which isn't like the difference between first edition D&D and second edition D&D, where they're basically two different games. Second edition of Fantasy Age is basically just a really, really large errata that kind of fixes a lot of the problems that the Fantasy Age system has. Doesn't fix all of them. So if I was to do a Dragon Age RPG, I would probably use the Fantasy Age system. However, for the Mana series, there isn't a Mana series tabletop RPG. And so that would be one that I'd have to try and create. I would have to either create my own system, which isn't happening, or I'd have to find a system that I can reflavor to become a Mana series system. And I've done that twice before. I work with Zelda Universe, which is one of the largest and oldest Zelda fan sites on the internet. And for, I guess it's been like almost 7 years now, I've been running tabletop RPGs for them on their Twitch channel on Saturday mornings. And so the first one I ran, we used the Open Legend system, and I modified it to kind of create this Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild themed RPG. And that campaign ended a little over a year ago. And now it's been almost a year since I've been running the new campaign, which we call Tears of the Realms, which is thematically similar to Tears of the Kingdom. And it acts as a sequel to our last series. And I'm using a modified version of the Cypher system, specifically the Strange, to be able to run that game. And so I'm very used to kind of modifying systems to work for the way I want, but I haven't really picked a system that I would want to use for a Mana series tabletop RPG. I've already thought about Fabula Ultima, because Fabula Ultima is 100% designed to emulate kind of similar themes. It's not meant to emulate the Mana series in general, because the Mana series is action oriented, and Fabula Ultima is 100% designed to emulate old school turn-based combat like Final Fantasy. But I could see myself modifying Fabula Ultima if I wanted to. However, I just ran a Fabula Ultima campaign last December, and so I don't want to do it again using the exact same system, even though it would be very different. So I'm trying to toss around ideas, and I'd be interested to hear from you guys. What is a system that you think would fit a Mana series style tabletop RPG? I've thought about using the Cypher system, specifically the idea of being able to change jobs by just equipping a different elemental spirit. We could very much basically make the elemental spirits focuses, which is part of when you build a character in the Cypher system. You have a descriptor, a type, and a focus. Your descriptor is effectively kind of akin to your race in more regular tabletop RPGs like D&D. Your type is effectively your class, and your focus is effectively your subclass. And so if I just decided on basically 8 different focuses that each one was related to a mana spirit, I could basically just let the players kind of trade those focuses between each other to use it. I have no idea if that's how it's going to work, where you can only have one person as any mana spirit at any given time in Visions of Mana, because they just haven't given us that information. But that would probably be a way that I could do it. But again, I'm already running a Cypher System game, and the whole purpose of Daily December is trying new things. So that's one idea I've tossed around. But like I said, I'm really, really interested. What systems do you guys think might make for a really fun Mana Series style game? And I'm not so much looking for a system that thematically is the same as the Mana Series. Like, there's already a system that I've thought about using called Break. I backed it years ago, and kind of like Fabula Ultima, it's meant to emulate the idea of like anime style things, though Fabula Ultima is much more about like anime style JRPGs, whereas Break is more about just emulating anime in general. And so Break does have a similar feeling to the Mana Series in and of itself, and the look of the game is that. But that's not really what I'm looking for. I'm looking more at mechanics that allow me to modify them, because theme and stuff like that is flavor. I can add flavor wherever I want. But I'm looking at mechanics that allow me to have elemental spirits that somehow allow the characters to do cool things, and kind of an action-oriented feel to the combat in general. So things that allow you to do cool special moves and stuff like that. I've thought about maybe actually running a 4th edition D&D campaign for the Mana Series, because I think 4th edition, I think I already made a pitch during Daily December last year about how I think Trials of Mana could be turned into a 4th edition campaign really easily. So I might go that route, which could be cool and fun. Who knows? So anyway, my question to you: what if I was to make a Mana Series game? What system would you guys like me to use? Let me know in the comments down below. Any system is fair game. You guys will probably know I'm not a huge fan of Pathfinder or Pathfinder 2nd Edition. If you think that Pathfinder would make the perfect Mana Series game, make your pitch in the comments down below. I'd love to hear how you think the system itself fits the Mana Series, or your guys' idea on how to do it. So the sky's the limit. Choose any system you want. Just let me know what you think would be cool. Anyway, it's going to be all for me today. We'll see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.